Good evening all and welcome to week 4, the final week of the June content bonanza. We're starting off strong with some deep woods stories. The first one is an absolute classic and a banger, if I do say so myself. Timestamps in the description, of course, and don't forget that if you want to support Mort, you can donate a few dollars every month and follow me over on Patreon for some cool exclusive content. I would really appreciate that, and you get your name at the end and a bunch of cool stuff too. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I grew up in Ohio in the 70s, and me and my childhood friend Joe were outside all the time we could manage. Joe lived on a farm that bordered a pretty vast forest, and my parents would drop me off in the morning, and we'd stay in the woods all weekend. We'd only come out for school. We loved pretending we were frontiersmen. We'd build shelters, traps, practice making fires with sticks, the whole 9 yards. When we got to be in high school, we got this notion to pull a Stand By Me. This was based on the movie of the same name that had just come out. The idea was that we'd walk the railroad tracks out in the country, but instead of looking for a perished body, we'd find cool bridges to fish from and camp a little ways off the track. Of course, we knew this was dangerous and we'd likely be trespassing, but we were kids. We had a lot of fun. We did find beautiful rivers. We discovered bridges no one went to. We fished. We hid from trains, and at night we camped in woods just near the tracks and made small hidden fires. Nothing bad ever happened. It was idyllic. In fact, it was so fun we did it multiple times and never had any problems. After high school, me and Joe went our own ways. We both left home, but always kept in touch, and always tried to coordinate visits so we'd find each other occasionally. Well, one summer in the mid-90s, it worked out that we were both in town for about a week. We'd do stuff with the family in the day, and at night we'd either catch drinks at a bar or sit outside Joe's house and around the fire and talk about the old days. One night, me and Joe got to talking about our Stand By Me trips. Well, nostalgia and beer can be a hell of a mix. Soon we decided to take a day, walk the rails, camp one night and walk home. The day came. We started out early morning. We had my wife drop us off in our old spot where we used to start, right outside our hometown. She thought this was absolutely crazy and made sure to mention it. When she pulled away, Joe suggested that instead of walking the usual route, we take the opposite direction, just to be adventurous. We knew the land well, we had a map. So I gave it a, what the hell? And off we set. The day went fine, it was fun. A little sad, but in a good way. We found a bridge and sat on the edge, smoked a joint and move on. We had no fishing gear, but we had bought some canned food and other stuff. Before the night started to set in, we picked a spot to camp. It was a thick, forested area, trees on every side of the train track so you felt like you were in a tunnel. We had brought small hammocks to sleep on, but before we had set them up, we decided to do a little scouting of the perimeter. Now, this is just what we used to do in the old days too. We'd walk the area around a little bit to make sure some dude's house wasn't just over a hill, and we were actually camping in their yard. We walked maybe 100 or so feet into the woods and up a small incline. We figured if we didn't see anything from the top of this short hill, we'd be fine. But when we got to the top, we saw an old building down at the bottom, about 100 yards into the woods. It was barely visible. We pondered over what to do. We both assumed it was a sugar shack or something, because there didn't appear to be a clear road to it. From where we were, there didn't appear to be anyone in it either. All was quiet. No movement could be seen, no lights. So we decided to walk a little closer just to make sure. We came down the hill very slowly, and as we neared it, we saw it wasn't a sugar shack at all. It was an old church. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was a squat, sagging building whose wooden planks were almost black from years of moss and rot. A cross still stood on the top of the place, also weathered black. None of the windows had glass, and there was no door, just open doorways. When we got close enough to see inside, there were rows of pews and a built-up section in the front for a preacher to stand. We didn't go all the way in, we didn't want to. Beyond all that, there was no signs of anyone else, no footprints, no paths, no roads. It was just an abandoned church. We left immediately and went back up the hill to our spot that we had picked to camp. Having a hill between us and the church made us feel better, but we were still a little uneasy. We chalked it up to the natural creepiness of seeing a church in the middle of nowhere. Besides, at this point it was dusk, and we just decided to rig our hammocks and go to sleep, and move on at early morning. Night set in, and as we lay in our hammocks, we chatted and began to hear something in the direction of the church. Our conversation went a little like this. "Did you hear that?" "What the hell is that?" "It sounds like people singing." And it did sound like singing. We both slid right out of our hammocks and hunkered down, straining to hear more. We listened for a minute or two, and the singing continued, but it wasn't getting louder. Finally, we decided to creep back up the hill and see if we could spy where the sound was coming from. We could still move very quietly in the woods from the old days. It was second nature to us. The moon was barely out, but it provided enough light so you wouldn't walk right into a tree, but it was near pitch black. We didn't use flashlights as we crept slowly down the hill, and we didn't talk. When we got to the top, we saw light in the distance. It was coming from the church, and the singing was coming from inside. Joe and I put our heads close together and had a hushed conversation that boiled down to the following. "Can you believe this?" The light looked like candlelight the way it flickered, and though we tried, we couldn't make out what was being sung. It sounded like church music but in another language. We sat and watched for a while, trying to see who was there, but we only saw the occasional shadows. We had no intention of getting closer either, and we had about a football fielding length between us, and we aimed to keep it that way. The singing continued for a bit, and finally it subsided. After that, a booming male voice began to chant. I was already freaked out, but this voice thoroughly scared me. It sounded like some Old Testament preacher you see in movies. But again, it was like he was speaking a different language because we couldn't understand a single word. Eventually, it got to where the single male voice would say something, and then a bunch of voices would answer in song. This lasted a while, and then they all broke into this long, sustained wail that kept getting louder. It got so loud and so disturbing that I covered my ears, and then it stopped. At that point, I was getting ready to say, "Let's get the hell out of here," when Joe put his hand on my shoulder and hissed, "They're coming out." We were far enough away that we couldn't make them out really well, but what we could see was a line of figures walking out the open doorway and holding hands in single file. We could see more of them had flashlights, and they began to sing again, and the lights from the flashlight began to move towards us in the hill. We booked it back down to our campsite, grabbed our stuff and ran to the tracks. Once there, we ran down the tracks in the direction we had come from, and after a few minutes we stopped and looked back. We saw lights coming down the hill. They were moving erratically, like whoever was holding them was shaking them. We continued to run in spurts and walk as fast as we could. We eventually stopped seeing the lights and came to a road. By our map, we knew a small town was about 15 minutes down it, and we walked there, got to a 24-hour gas station and called my wife to come and collect us. My wife and other friend all thought it was just kids messing around, but I heard those voices, and they sure as hell didn't sound like kids to me. I'm not sure who those people were, but it was definitely the creepiest thing that happened to me out in the woods. 6 years ago, my friend Sam and I decided we wanted to go camping. He and I had been close friends for years, so going on a trip just the two of us didn't seem weird. And for the sake of company, and maybe to balance things out, I invited my friend Rita along too. The more the merrier. We chose a remote campsite that I hadn't visited in a few years. I remember the general direction, so we packed up and hit the road. Outside the last little town before the wilderness, we stopped at a gas station and asked the clerk for confirmation on the way. He just pointed us towards the horizon and said, "Follow the storm." Sure enough, in the direction we were heading, the sky was bruised black with the meanest clouds I'd ever seen. Lightning flickered across the tree line like angry veins. We parked the car to reassess. The storm looked genuinely dangerous. Lightning was crackling just beyond the windshield, thunder shaking the frame. But being the fools we were, or badasses, depending on your point of view, we decided to tough it out. We liked camping in the rain. It added atmosphere. But the further we got down that narrow dirt road, the worse I felt. There's no better way to say it. I felt dread. Something deep in my gut turned cold and certain. I just knew something awful was going to happen. The lightning intensified, arcing through the trees so close we could smell the ozone. We finally decided perhaps it was too risky, and we turned the car around, and as soon as we exited the forest, the storm vanished. Blue skies, dead calm like it had never been here. Figuring we could salvage the night, we drove 20 minutes out to a reservoir with a man-made lake and a few scattered campsites. We parked near the entrance to the trail and started hiking around the lake to find a more private spot. Near the trailhead, a couple was already set up. We chatted briefly, nice enough people, and invited them to swing by our site later for drinks and games. We found a quiet spot down the trail and started setting up camp. Just then, I got a text from another friend, an artist I'd known for years. She started asking where we were, and when I told her, she texted back something strange. "Great, I've been looking for a big fire. I'm on my way." Odd thing to say, but she's quirky, a heavy weed smoker, artsy type, and generally unpredictable. We set up camp, cracked some drinks, and eventually the couple from earlier arrived. We were laughing, swapping stories, and having a blast. Then my artist friend showed up, dragging this grotesque, almost life-size sculpture behind her. It looked like a primitive totem of some sort, but all wrong angles and staring eyes. She told us she made it in her freshman year of college, and ever since her life has spiraled with bad luck, so it had to go. She brought it to burn. We all laughed, tossed it in the fire, and watched it slowly become ash. But later that night, things shifted. The couple retreated back to their site. My artist friend left as planned, which left just me, my friend, and Sam. But something had happened. Sam was not being himself. He had smoked with the artist and been drinking steadily, cross-faded for sure, but this was beyond drunk or stoned. His voice changed. At first, it dropped into something gravelly and deep, almost like he was mimicking movie villains, but it didn't sound playful. He then started muttering nonsense at first, then more coherent delusions. He pulled Rita aside and whispered that he worked for the CIA, had millions in offshore accounts, so could make any of us disappear. At first, we laughed it off. Just another drunk guy spinning fantasies. But Rita noticed something more disturbing. Her hatchet, the one that we had been using to chop firewood, was now missing. We searched everywhere, but the dark made it hopeless. Sam had gone quiet again, sitting cross-legged on the other side of the fire, muttering to himself under his breath. Eventually, he slumped over and passed out. Rita and I sat by the fire, chuckling nervously about how weird he'd been behaving. Then the first raindrops started to fall. That storm, the one we thought we had escaped, had found us. We decided to wake Sam and get him into the tent. Gently shaking him awake, he groaned and staggered up, barely coherent. Rita and I took each arm to guide him, but as soon as we stopped to unzip the tent, everything shattered. He snapped. He screamed, high-pitched and otherworldly. It wasn't even human. He thrashed violently, throwing Rita across the clearing, then, with a sudden, eerie grace, spun around and kicked at the fire, scattering the last of the glowing coals and plunging us into complete darkness. Before I could process what was happening, he was on me. I remember hitting the ground hard, my breath gone. Then I realized he was on my chest. His massive frame was pinning me down, and his hands were wrapped around my neck, squeezing with terrifying force. I clawed at his arms, but his reach was so long I couldn't even touch his chest. I buckled, thrashed, and did everything I could to throw him off, but it was useless. Rita was screaming for me in the dark, trying to find us. And then I heard her grunting, pinching, and slamming her fists into him, but Sam didn't budge. I was fading. My vision was blurring, and my limbs were going limp. Then nothing. When I came to, Rita was dragging me down the path, sobbing softly. She had saved me. She later told me that when I went limp she thought I was dead, and something inside her snapped, and she beat him with everything she had. She kneed him in the face until he collapsed, then hauled my unconscious body away barefoot in the dark. My flip-flops were gone. I could feel the cuts on my feet as I walked. Without hesitation, Rita took off her sandals and gave them to me. I don't think I've ever loved anyone more in that moment. We made our way back towards the parking lot, and when we passed by the couple's campfire, we screamed for help. The man came out armed, ready to confront Sam, but his girlfriend convinced us to get to safety instead. Smart choice. We remembered there was a camp manager's trailer not far from the lot. We made it there, banged on the door, and broke down, explaining the events. The woman brought us water, and her husband called the cops. I remember sitting on their couch, shaking, and noticing the 5 deadbolts on their front door. I knew one thing for sure. Sam wasn't going to get through that. 30 minutes later, police and EMTs arrive. Officers took our statements and asked if Sam was armed. We told them about the missing hatchet, and they went in weapons drawn. When they found him, he was still at the campsite, completely naked, holding the hatchet and covered in scratches and blood, and laughing. He told them he was possessed and kept mumbling nonsense about the devil. They arrested him. Rita and I were taken to the hospital. I had bruises on my throat so severe they ran a CT scan to check for internal damage. They wanted to keep me overnight, but I refused. My cat was at home, locked in my room alone, because I'd left my keys in my camping bag. When I got home, I could hear him meowing from behind the door while I cried, still high on painkillers and trauma. Rita, saint that she is, drove out with her mum to recover all of our belongings. It took 24 hours and 0 sleep for this nightmare to end. The aftermath? Charges filed. A court case, and Sam pleaded guilty. When he asked if he had anything to say, he declined. He had no apology to give, and apparently no remorse either. I still don't know exactly what happened that night. But I know this. Sam was never a violent man. He had never even raised his voice at me before. And you know what? I truly believe that effigy, the one we burnt, must have had something dark in it. As my artist friend mentioned, It apparently brought her bad luck, and she meant it. Or maybe it was just the weed and alcohol. Or something else entirely that I don't know about. But I know what I saw. And I'll never forget that night. I haven't been camping since. I work as a broadcast engineer. A few years ago, I got a call at around 9:30, maybe 10 p.m. from one of our engineering techs on the overnight shift. Our OTA signal, over the air, was dead. The transmitter had gone offline completely, and I was on call with a few other engineers and my boss at the time, trying to isolate the issue. It didn't take long to figure out the failure point. The RF transmitter up on Beacon Mountain in Beacon, New York. It was the kind of issue that regrettably had to be fixed in person. After a brief uncomfortable silence, my boss asked if someone would go with him to the site. No one volunteered, and after a few seconds I said I'd go. Beacon Mountain is a little over an hour from the station, and at the time I'd never been up there, certainly not in the middle of the night. It was near midnight when I met up with my boss, and we started the slow climb up the mountain road, if you could even call it a road. It was basically a steep, winding strip of rock and dirt that spiraled its way through dense forest, narrow enough that passing someone coming down meant flirting with the edge, and rough enough that a wrong tire placement could slide the whole vehicle into a ditch, or worse. And dark, unbelievably dark. The kind of darkness that eats your headlights and makes your stomach tense for no reason except instinct. On the way up we saw 2 separate campfires burning deep in the woods. A couple of off-road jeeps came down the other direction, bouncing along like it was normal, and my boss muttered something about locals, sometimes hanging out up here drinking and messing around, and said we should avoid them if things get weird, in a tone that didn't sound like a joke. He paused and told me he never comes up the mountain without a firearm. I asked him why. He said, "It's not the locals. I've seen things out here I can't explain." That stuck with me. We got to the top and got to work. The transmitter wasn't in great shape, but it was a relatively simple fix, a breaker issue. We did what we needed to do, locked the building up, and got back into the vehicle to descend the mountain. But that's when things got strange. There's a particularly steep section about halfway down where you have to ride the brake or risk barreling into a tree. It was there that 3 deer bolted across the trail in front of us, moving like they were running for their lives. They didn't even register their headlights, just tore across the road like we weren't there. My boss had to swerve hard to avoid hitting them, and the truck slammed into a rock and jolted to a stop. He cut the engine immediately and the forest went silent around us, and then we heard it. From somewhere just uphill and behind us, maybe 10 or 15 feet, there was a crack of branches, followed by a heavy thud as something large bolted up the slope through the brush. I spun around with my flashlight and caught only the tail end of motion. Leaves settling, twigs still bouncing, and branches shifting in the aftermath. But whatever it was already gone. I looked at my boss. "Bear?" "Nah, bears don't run like that. That thing was on 2 legs and bears don't chase deer like that." There was no doubt in his voice. I thought about that night a lot. Could it have been a person? Maybe. But why run at deer in the pitch darkness and vanish uphill like that without a word, without a light? And if it was a person, why flee when we stopped the truck? Why bolt the second the engine went off? And this hill? It wasn't a jog, it was a steep, uneven one full of debris. Whatever ran away from us, it was fast, really fast, too fast for a person in the dark. It was up and out of sight in under 4 seconds. And my boss isn't the joking type. He isn't into pranks or tall tales. He was quiet, serious, and not easily rattled. But he was that night. He didn't say much for the rest of the ride, and we didn't see anyone. Just more dark forest and gravel under tires. I've actually been up to Beacon Mountain several times since, but always in daylight, and I've never experienced anything like that again. I eventually left my job, and the company sold the transmitter site not long after. I don't think I'll ever have a reason to return. But there are no known sightings or legends up there that I'm aware of, no stories to explain what we heard. But there have been a string of accidents on that road over the years. I used to think that was just because of bad road conditions, and now I'm not so sure. Something's up there. I don't know what it was, and maybe I don't want to, but it moved like it didn't belong to this world. It wasn't shaped right. It was nothing I knew about. All I know is it came out of nowhere, and it likes chasing deer. But to what end? I can't say. Back in 2008, before I started uni, I needed some extracurricular activities for my application, and like many UK students, I aimed to complete the Duke of Edinburgh Award, which involved an orienteering expedition. Essentially a long trek through woodland and villages using only a map, a compass and no GPS. It's a test of teamwork and endurance and navigating through the wild. Since I was pretty out of shape at the time, my uncle offered to take me out for a practice hike. Not overnight, just the long day trek to give me a taste of what to expect. We ended up hiking around 10 miles through woods and a small village, under miserable soaking rain. By the end, we were drenched, cold, and just wanting to get back to the car. The last stretch was a dirt trail climbing uphill, flanked by dense bushes and trees. We were marching in silence when suddenly a rustling in the bushes to our left caught my attention. Out stepped an old man, dressed as if he'd just come out of a funeral. Black suit, red bow tie, polished dress shoes. He looked to be in his late 70s or early 80s. Pale skin and liver spots, and a neat grey-white comb-over. I was immediately unsettled. Who hikes in the woods dressed like that, especially in this weather? But what really got to me was the man was completely dry, with no mud or dirt on his shoes despite the downpour and wet trail. We froze staring at him, and he stared right back, like two sets of ghosts caught in a moment. My uncle stepped forward, breaking the silence to ask if he was okay. The man didn't move for a moment, almost as if stuck in a trance. Then suddenly he snapped out of it. His arms flailed wildly, and he said something about a friend who needed help. Then without another word, he started walking backwards into the woods and beckoning us to follow. We took after him, starting at a brisk walk that quickly turned into a full sprint to keep up. After a minute, he slipped ahead and disappeared from sight, but we could hear his voice leading us on. Eventually, we reached a steep, slick, mud slope, probably at about a 40-degree angle and 50 feet high with nothing to grab onto. The old man was standing at the bottom, waving frantically, begging us to come down and help him. I looked down at the slope incredulous. How had he gotten down so quickly and stayed perfectly clean? Even at a distance, he looked bone dry. My uncle and I exchanged looks. We both felt something was deeply wrong. Just as I stepped forward to attempt the descent, my uncle grabbed my arm tightly, whispering, "Something's not right here," and we retreated a few steps. The man's pleading turned into fury. His voice dropped into a growl, fists pounding on his knees in a toddler tantrum. His face flushed from pale to red in seconds. His eyes bulged like they might burst. I'd never seen such raw rage in a grown man. Without another word, we hurried back along the trail, his angry demands fading behind us. My uncle called emergency services on the way, reporting a possibly unstable or mentally ill man wandering the woods. The dispatchers told us to stay put and await police. An hour later, 4 officers showed up, 2 with search dogs and emergency supplies. We led them to the exact spot, then pointed the officers and dogs towards the path the man had taken. They searched all weekend and found no sign of him. The only footprints they could find were ours. No trace of the mysterious old man, no belongings, no anything. To this day, that encounter remains one of the strangest and most unsettling experiences I've ever had. In years to come, I'd read about an encounter someone in the States had. They were hiking along a forgotten trail in the middle of nowhere when they saw someone who beckoned to them, similar to us. He followed this man through the wilderness, who would always be a lot further than expected and could cover great distances far faster than should be normal. When he reached the point the man had wanted him to reach, he was no longer in sight. But there, he found the decaying skeleton of that person. And after reading that story, and experiencing what I did, I draw some parallels. And I wonder if it was a spectre, a shade, a ghost, the echo of a person who was trying to guide us to his last resting place, to perhaps uncover something that had happened to him. I'll never know. What do you all think? Very early, on a cold, dark, moonless morning in November, I scarfed down breakfast with a few close friends around the campfire and slipped away to head for my hunting stand. We were bow hunting in southern Ohio, a ritual that brought us back every year. Our camp sat high on a bluff overlooking the Ohio River, and on those chilly fall nights, the glow of distant barge lights drifted slowly past beneath a blanket of stars, the smoke of our fire curling into the sky like a signal to another world. It was a truly magical time. We were here for 4 days, and it was very pleasant to be able to leave the hustle and bustle of the city behind and truly immerse ourselves in nature. I drove out alone, winding down a narrow stretch of paved road before turning north away from the river, onto a dirt trail that snaked through one of the many hollows etched into the landscape. The road followed a creek bottom nestled between steep hills, and as I eased along, cell service vanished, and I felt the real world fall away behind me. All I could see was the dim, silver ribbon of gravel ahead, caught in my headlights and the silhouettes of bare trees shifting in the beam. I eased the car over to the shoulder, careful not to get stuck, and quietly gathered my gear. From that point forward, everything was done under the faint glow of my headlamp turned low. Even the car door I closed with a gentle push, avoiding any sound that might shatter the fragile silence of the woods. Before setting off, I paused, breathed deep. The air was crisp. There was no wind, no birds, no rustle of deer, no noise of any kind. I knew then I'd have to move like a shadow. I crept downhill, picked my way across the shallow creek, and found the barely there trail that I'd carved through the thicket over years of scouting. It was more instinct than path now. Every step was calculated, testing twigs with my toes before shifting my weight and gliding between the brambles in silence. At the base of a tree, I began to rig my stand, a climber that would take me 20 feet up to a perch I knew well. I inched up the tree, close enough to the bark to feel its texture scrape past my cheeks. When I reached the top and secured myself, I melted into the darkness. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. Occasionally I sipped coffee, waiting for the woods to change. And as the sky began to lighten, the moment hunters call shooting light, long before sunrise, I heard something, crackling, rustling, coming from up the hill behind me, perhaps 150 yards away. At first, I thought it was a deer, maybe a buck chasing a doe in the rut, which I'd seen dozens of times. They'll tear through the woods like they're on fire. But this wasn't that. The sound moved too quickly, in a perfectly straight line slicing through the terrain. A few seconds later, it was basically on top of me. Now bear in mind, what I saw next is quite hard to explain clearly. At first, I thought I saw movement, Then I wasn't sure. I could make out every leaf on the forest floor, the faint outlines of brush. But what was coming towards me had no shape. It was motion without form, a translucent blur of brown and grey and black, like something smeared through glass or thick fog moving at unnatural speed. It surged over the rocky cliff to my left, a sheer wall of boulders and leaf litter fixtures, and crossed the ground below me in a blink. I was 20 feet up, eye level with the crest, and it leapt over. And still, I feel like it nearly brushed the base of my tree. It didn't veer, didn't stumble or slow. In that split second, my body flooded with adrenaline. My heart hammered in my throat. This thing, this presence felt impossible, like a force of nature, not a living animal. Coyotes don't run that fast. Bobcats don't move like that. No four-legged predator I've ever seen can move through terrain like it wasn't even there. My brain scrambled to make sense. It could climb, couldn't it? Something like that. It was fast enough to leap up the tree and be on me in seconds, and I froze utterly helpless, eyes fixed on the blur as it passed directly beneath me, then barreled into the thickest part of the forest, and vanished, without ever making a sound I could assign to paw, hooves, or claws. It was like a ghost, no real shape, just colour and speed, and then gone. It tore through the terrain that should have slowed anything to a crawl, navigating a rocky creek bed, dense bramble, or even uneven hillsides like they weren't even there. A stretch that would take a human 10 to 15 minutes to hike, it cleared in seconds. The moment it disappeared, a cold wave settled into my body. Not fear exactly, but a terrible unease. My mind fought to rationalize it. It must have been a fox, a coyote, something normal, something explainable. But every possibility felt hollow. The terrain, the speed, the lack of noise, the translucent quality. It didn't fit. I turned my eyes towards the creek where the undergrowth thickened into a shaded tangle of brush. A pale fog hovered over it now, glowing faintly in the soft dawn light. I remained still, trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed, but nothing came. Eventually the sun broke over the ridge, flooding the forest with gold, and the shadows lifted. I didn't see another animal for that entire day. This happened when I was 17, that age when most of my friends were getting their driver's license. We all had that rush for freedom, that new car craze. It was pretty common for us to skip school and go for a ride out of town. The city I live in is wrapped around by thick forest and 2 mountains, so we had lots of places to drive to and just chill. One summer night, a friend was super excited to show us a spot he found online, probably on Reddit, a place that people said had a strange reputation and a paranormal hotspot. Typical teenagers, we were all in. No one really believed in ghosts or spirits, but the thrill of the unknown was enough to convince us to check it out. As we drove up the mountain, we were jamming to the radio. But as we went deeper into the woods, the station faded to static. No surprise there, right? That's just how it goes when you're far from civilization. The night was warm, and the car was filled with the careless energy only summer nights can hold. We stopped the music and started chatting, making guesses and jokes about what we might find. Honestly, most of us didn't expect much. Then out of nowhere, the radio crackled to life, blasting static, even though we turned it off a few minutes before. We all jumped a little, but chalked it up to interference. Radios do weird stuff sometimes. A few minutes later, the same thing happened. Loud static coming from the radio. Still turned off. We all stared at it, puzzled, but said nothing. Probably a glitch, right? Then came the third time. Suddenly, the driver slammed on the brakes and pulled the car to a stop. He spun around in his seat, eyes wide. "Did you hear that? What was it?" He said he heard a voice, but but we didn't hear anything except static. He wasn't messing around. He turned the engine off, which meant no power and no radio, and the car went completely silent. Outside, the night was pitch black. The forest around us swallowed every bit of light. No street lamps, no stars, no moonlight, nothing. Then the radio's power light flicked on by itself. Static hissed through the speakers. Then a soft female voice started singing, barely audible at first. The song grew a little louder, then faded back to silence and vanished entirely. Strangely, the static disappeared with it. We sat there frozen. Then, when the driver flickered the headlights on, we all saw it. Smudges on the windshield. Fingers smeared across the glass like something had pressed against it from the outside, and the whole car fell silent again. No one wanted to say it, but we knew it was time to leave. We didn't slam on the gas immediately. Instead, we drove a little further up a nearby hill, stopped, took some pictures of the Milky Way, which was beautiful, and headed home. Since then, my friends went back a few times without me. They say they recorded the same eerie radio interference and even felt a faint push of the car while it was off. I want to believe there's a logical explanation for everything, maybe a radio glitch or a prank or someone messing with us. But it's hard to believe that, and I'm leaning more towards something paranormal happening. What do you guys all think? I'd hiked in before dawn, about 3 miles off the beaten path, into a remote pocket of forest I'd scouted earlier in the season. It took me over an hour, picking my way through the barely there game trails until I found my spot. A shallow depression near a fallen pine that made a good natural blind. I got there about half an hour before sunrise and started to settle in. Then the wind shifted, and a fog rolled in fast, thick as milk. Within minutes, visibility was down to 5 feet. I hunkered in, tucked against the log, and wrapped my coat tighter, and then heard twigs snapping. Normally that's a hopeful sound, a deer moving in, but this didn't feel right. It sent a cold ripple through me that had nothing to do with the weather. I eased around into my lever action, 30 to 30 slowly, and went still. The noise kept coming in soft, inconsistent rustling, sometimes close, sometimes circling, but I couldn't see a damn thing. As the sun finally began to peek over the ridge, the fog thinned just enough to make out a vague shape in the trees, but nothing solid. The snapping of twigs had stopped. I lay there thinking how irrational it all was. Probably a herd of white tails bedding down around me without noticing I was there. Rare, but not impossible. I told myself that again and again. Then I sat up. There was silence. Absolute stillness. Whatever had been moving stopped the second I did, and I scanned the fog for silhouettes, antlers, movement of any kind. But there wasn't anything. The forest around me was empty. And that was it for the day. Not a single sign of life. I hunted until 3 in the afternoon, through wind and cold and impenetrable silence, and didn't even see a squirrel. Eventually I decided to call it in. No interest in hiking out after sunset. But the walk back wasn't right either. That uneasy feeling from the morning was back, stronger now. Normally I clear my rifle once I hit the main trail, but not that day. I kept it loaded, finger near the trigger, like something was breathing down my neck. Every 50 feet I stopped to listen, dead quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched or stalked. And then, just as I was coming up on the final turn before reaching my truck, I saw it. Hanging from a tree branch at eye level, right in the middle of the trail, was a stuffed teddy bear, weathered, dirty, and dangling by the neck from a length of rope. But what stopped me cold was its jacket. It was wearing a blaze orange, miniature hunting vest. I'm not easily rattled. I've dealt with snowstorms, animal encounters, injuries in remote places, but this, it felt deliberate, it felt personal, like someone knew I'd be coming out this way and they wanted to send me a message. I didn't touch the bear, just walked straight past it, loaded rifle in hand, and didn't exhale until I was locked in the cab of my truck and moving. I never hunted in that patch of woods again. I still don't know what it was I heard that morning. Animal, person, or something else entirely. Whatever it was, I know it didn't want me there, and I won't be coming back to find out why. Back in 2012, I was doing a lot of hiking through Oregon's coastal range. I'd head out for days alone, disappearing into the forested ridges and foothills with only the bare essentials. I didn't carry a GPS beacon. I wore muted colors and relied solely on my phone for navigation, which, in hindsight, is not the brightest setup. My chosen campsite sat a few miles from the nearest dirt road, far enough to feel removed from civilization. And I enjoyed the silence, the absence of people, no foot traffic, no fires, just forest. Sometimes I'd hear things, branches breaking, distant rustling, but nothing that ever really rattled me. Until one day in May of 2013, I had spent the day in a small town about 6 miles from camp, stocking up on supplies. As usual, I lingered longer than I should have, hiking back around dusk. Half the route was along a narrow dirt road. The rest was a trail that wasn't much more than a game path. It was getting dark, but there was enough moonlight to keep the trail visible. I never wore headphones and still don't. I like to hear what's around me, whether it's a mountain lion or something else. That night, somewhere along the narrow trail, I was mentally going over the next day's hike, when I felt something shift, not in the wind nor the terrain, something in myself. It was sudden and involuntary. I stopped walking, my thoughts were completely still, and my body went tense. I knew I wasn't alone. I hadn't heard anything. I just got the overwhelming and unshakable sense that something was behind me, 30 yards back. I turned around slowly and observed my surroundings, but the trail was clear. Nonetheless, I could feel it. The sick sort of gravity, like eyes watching you, like a rope being pulled taut between your spine and something just out of view. It was watching me. Worse still, it knew I would. There's the part that's hard to explain. It felt like communication, like it wanted me to turn around and look again. It wanted me to approach it, but I didn't. I turned forward and started walking. Fast, not running. I didn't want to give it reason to chase, and even if I didn't run, where would I go? My camp? Great, lead it straight to my tent. So I just kept my pace, not looking back. I was trying to stay logical. I hadn't seen anything, maybe it was just nerves. Then I heard it. A rush of air, low and fast, like something big moving through space at speed. Right after the sound of claws or something dragging across the trail fast, 4 times in quick succession, close, maybe 20 yards behind me. I didn't stop, I didn't turn around, I just kept moving, heart pounding, trying not to let my fear take over. Whatever it was stayed back there, far enough to not be seen, but close enough to let me know it was there. I felt it pacing me, watching me, for over an hour. Eventually, the sensation started to lift. I reached my camp, got into my tent, but couldn't sleep. I laid there, knife in hand, until dawn finally arrived. When the sun came up, I packed my gear and left. I haven't been back. I still don't know what I felt out there, but I never saw it. But I do know that whatever it was, certainly saw me. Last summer, a good friend and I set out on a backpacking trip through New Hampshire's White Mountain National Forest. As fairly experienced day hikers, we felt ready to tackle our first overnight wilderness adventure. Ellis, my buddy, suggested we make it special by camping at a backcountry site in the Dry River wilderness. I was all in, beautiful views, historic trails, and true solitude. Before we left, I did some research. Throughout the mid to late 1900s, the Dry River wilderness had several lean-to shelters for backpackers wanting to escape the crowds. Over time, many were dismantled or fell into disrepair, except for one, Dry River Shelter Number 3, the last remaining refuge in the area. On the morning of our hike, Ellis and I met at the trailhead under a thick blanket of fog. The low visibility wiped out the stunning views we'd hoped for, but the trail was classic New England rock scrambling along the Amonosuk River. We reached the Presidential Ridge and stopped at the lakes of the Clouds Hut, buzzing with hikers of all kinds. For a brief moment the sun broke through, revealing the Dry River Valley from Mount Monroe's summit before the fog rolled back in. With the wind stiffening and views fading, we hustled below the tree line into the wilderness zone. Beyond this point, civilization and even rangers were scarce. The trail grew overgrown and muddy, but oddly there were no footprints, no human, no animal. At least we'd have some real isolation. After about an hour's descent, Ellis spotted the lean-to just as our legs begged for a break. It was an old timber shelter, perfectly preserved, with a well-used fire pit beside a cold mountain river. As we settled in, I noticed a small notebook tucked into a corner of the shelter. On its cover, someone had written Dry River Shelter Number 3. I flipped it open and found only one name and date, yesterday, a lone camper's log. But we'd seen no signs of anyone that had been here recently. No footprints, no animal tracks. Rain can wash tracks away, but not everything. But there was something that felt off. I showed Ellis, who shrugged it off. Probably just some seasoned hiker who was good at not leaving a trace, he said. I wanted to believe him. That night we made a roaring fire by the river. Ellis remarked on how utterly silent it was. No people, just rustling like the faint chirp of birds. The stillness was eerie. I camped in my tent while Ellis took the lean-to. Sleep came fast after hiking 8 miles with a heavy pack, but it didn't last. Suddenly, I woke up to a sharp slapping noise like someone swinging a 2x4 into a tree or snapping a thick branch. I figured it was a bear searching for our food bag hanging 20 to 50 yards away. Nothing unusual for New Hampshire. Morning brought sun over the peaks and a chance to stretch, and as I brewed coffee I noticed the notebook again. This time it was open on the floor. I was sure I'd placed it closed in the corner, and curiously I opened it. Hey Ellis, were you checking this camp log out last night? Nah, I passed out. It's not like there's anything to read. I flipped through and found at least 20 new names logged since yesterday. Dozens of entries in neat handwriting. The single name I'd first seen was repeated several times deeper in the book. Dude, how did we miss all of these? Ellis said while his face went pale. That's when I told him about the slapping noise. He denied it, said it was a bear. No crazies, no hooligans. It's a bear, Jack. Let's just get out of here. And so we did. Not 10 minutes later, we were hiking out. It's been a year, and I still don't know what to make of that night at Dry River Shelter Number 3. The memory of that first lone name in the logbook is as clear as day to both of us. Did I imagine the noise? The new entries? I mean, we both saw it. Ellis thinks about it often too. But what do you think? I'd love to get some answers. It's been a real head-scratcher for a long time. This experience was honestly one of the most terrifying things that ever happened to me while walking my dog. And he's done some weird stuff before. Back in 2015, I had to choose between getting a dog or a smartphone. I'd never had a dog before, or a decent phone for that matter. But I'd been saving up for a phone anyway, so naturally I picked the dog. My dad knew a guy who had a few border collies that had recently had a litter, so we drove out, and the guy gave me the last pup. Enter Bailey. A few weeks after his shots, I started walking him. My parents expected I hang out at the park and socialize him there, but no. I took him around the perimeter of a nearby farm to keep the farm dog in him. I had been sneaking onto that farm for years. The farmer was an old family friend. My uncle had worked with him, so if I got caught, I could always just drop their names. On either side of the farm were thick woods. No one had ever really warned me about them. One sunny afternoon, after a week of pouring rain, Bailey was itching for a walk. We went to the farm at our usual time and started making our way around the east woods. Everything was quiet, but Bailey kept darting off to explore, puppy instincts. I kept calling his name as we went along. We were about halfway past the woods, and I could see the roof of the farmhouse just over the hill. Bailey had been pulling all sorts of crap out of the bushes, and I scolded him for rolling in a pile of fox scrap. When I heard it, a man's voice calling my dog by name, I froze. This dude I didn't know was calling Bailey by name. It wasn't the farmer. I knew his voice from family barbecues and weddings. I went silent, and the guy kept calling, his voice excited like he was thrilled to hear Bailey's name. That's what creeped me out the most. But Bailey, totally ignoring the guy, was still sniffing the fox scrap. I'm a tiny 18-year-old girl. The most combat training I ever had was a month of taekwondo when I was 11, with no phone on me. If that guy figured out where I was so screwed. And if Bailey ran after him, double screwed. No way I was letting some psycho get his hands on my puppy. So I had two choices, run to the farm or sprint across the field towards home. I grabbed Bailey and bolted. I heard someone crashing out of the woods behind me, but had already cleared the fence and was running full tilt home, puppy tucked under my arms. I got home and told my mum. She just brushed it off as some weird drunk guy. Weeks later, I was at my uncle's when the farmer showed up. I told my uncle the story, so he brought it up, and the farmer asked exactly which woods I'd been near and mentioned some clothes that had gone missing from his washing line. He'd blamed strong winds, but after hearing my story wasn't so sure. The next day I took my uncle and the farmer to the exact spot. We found a completely wrecked campsite, no clothes, but the tent had collapsed in on itself. No fire, but empty gas canisters, like the ones used for portable stoves, and scattered empty food packets everywhere. We reported it to the police, but nothing really came of it, except that I got a phone soon after, and I never left home without it. I'm a 22-year-old guy, currently finishing up my last semester of college. This story takes place during my freshman year at a small university in Connecticut, nestled right at the base of a well-known state park dominated by a large mountain. That mountain and its surrounding woods have a rich history, steeped in Native American folklore. Local tribes once lived in the region, and there have long been whispers of strange happenings. Not long ago, a kid tragically fell to his end hiking there. Behind my freshman dorm was a steep hill that led directly into these woods. It was the unofficial smoking spot for most people in our building, an easy and secluded place to relax away from campus. Halfway up the hill, there was a small clearing with a concrete wall where you could sit, and further up was a larger area with trails, and another, bigger concrete wall. Every night, my roommates and I would make our way up that hill to smoke and hang out. It felt safe. There were usually other people around, and it was a familiar routine. One night, my roommate and I headed up there alone. Our third roommate stayed back to study or do homework, I can't remember which. It was later than usual, right around midnight, and when we reached the smaller clearing halfway up, it was completely deserted. We didn't think much of it. We felt comfortable enough to go at any time. We packed a few bowls, neither of us novices, so the effects wouldn't have been overwhelming or paranoid-inducing. We settled in and just hung out, watching the trees sway in the strong wind. Then suddenly, everything changed. The wind stopped. The trees around us fell completely still, like a switch had been flipped. Stranger still, the leaves on the branches near us began to fall, not in a random flutter, but slowly and eerily, and all at the same height and speed as if choreographed by something unseen. We locked eyes and exchanged nervous, uneasy laughs. Almost instantly, a crushing sense of dread washed over us. It was that overwhelming feeling that something was terribly wrong, that we had to leave, and fast. My roommate later admitted he felt the exact same thing, though at that moment, we just bolted without discussing it. We grabbed our gear and sprinted down that hill like our lives depended on it. As I barreled down, my foot caught on something, and I fell hard on my back, slamming my elbow into the ground. It felt almost like something had yanked me backwards, but in hindsight, I think I just slipped from the loose dirt racing down that near vertical slope. Still, the sensation was unsettling. I scrambled up, ignoring the pain, and we rushed back into our dorm building, slamming the door behind us. After that night, my roommate refused to step foot inside the woods to smoke for the rest of the year. In the weeks that followed, I sometimes ventured up the hill alone. I wasn't always scared. I never felt threatened when I was by myself in the daylight. But on a few occasions around midnight, the same oppressive sense of impending doom crept over me, urging me to leave the woods immediately. The feeling was so palpable, like a cold hand gripping my chest, and I haven't been back since. What haunts me most even now is that slow, unnatural fall of the leaves, like a ghostly signal that something was watching us. There's a man-made reservoir about 3 miles from my home that spans over 650 acres of preserved state land. It's popular for boating, kayaking, fishing, and hiking. A network of trails circles the lake, stretching over 5 miles. Since moving here in 2004, I've spent countless hours exploring these woods, never once believing the place was haunted. But that changed one late fall day, an experience I'll never forget. By then, most of the leaves had fallen, leaving the trees bare and making it easy to spot squirrels scampering and birds flittering high in the branches. I'd been walking for about 45 minutes, deep enough into the woods to see no one else. On this trail, I always use a bench as a landmark, a turning point. Just before the bench, there was a narrow fishing trail that leads down to the reservoir's edge. As I crossed that fishing trail out of nowhere, an older man appeared. He had shoulder-length white hair. He wore a straw fishing hat, suspenders, and blue jeans. In one hand, he held a rusty metal bucket. In the other, a dog's leash. I followed his gaze to the end of the leash and saw nothing. No dog. The leash's clip lay motionless in the dirt. Startled but not frightened, I said, "Hello?" The man's eyes met mine, but he said nothing. He looked old enough to be my grandfather, and I was alone out there. Concerned, I stepped closer. "You all right?" Still no reply. He didn't move. He stared unblinking. Something about the silence unsettled me even more, so I decided not to press him. If he needed help, surely he'd say that. Shaken, I moved on towards the bench, glancing back, but the man had vanished. I rested a few minutes, hoping he'd left the trail, but when I returned to cross it again, he was there. The same old man, eyes fixed on the leash's end like before. This time I kept my gaze on the ground, avoiding his eyes, and as I passed, I felt his stare shift to me again. I dared to glance back through the mostly bare trees, and what I saw froze me cold. Beneath the brim of his straw hat, his skin was sickly grey. My breath caught, the world spun, and I forced myself to stare back for a moment before flight kicked in. My steps turned frantic as I hurried away, glancing back repeatedly to see those yellow eyes burning bright until the trees swallowed them from sight. What the hell had I just seen? I raced through the trail, trying to explain it away. Maybe the man was real, just tired after fishing and not in the mood to talk. Maybe the sunlight hit his eyes in just the right way to make them appear peculiar. Turning a corner, I almost ran into another hiker. "Hi," she said cheerfully. "Wait," I blurted. "This is going to sound insane, but I don't think you should walk down that trail." "Why, what happened?" I told her everything, expecting disbelief. Instead, she nodded and said she understood, but wasn't convinced it was anything paranormal. Together we walked to the trail's end and called the reservoir ranger on an emergency phone, reporting a man who might need help. The ranger followed us to the spot, but the man was gone. "There's no one there," the ranger said, clearly annoyed. "I'm sorry to bother you. He didn't look well. I thought he might need help." We waited, talking quietly. Then I asked, "Do you think it's possible what I saw wasn't human?" She looked genuinely confused, then smiled ruefully. "You looked like you saw a ghost when you passed me." It's been years since that day. Yet every time I pass that fishing trail, I find myself peering down it, half expecting to see the guy again. Though I never have, and really hope I don't. Hey guys, it's Mort here. We have reached the end of the video. I hope that it was to your liking. Some really creepy deep woods stories, if I do say so myself. And if you'd like a bit more creepy, over on my friend Warren's channel, A Warning to the Curious, you can hear an exclusive story by him, narrated by me. It's going to be on screen shortly and at the top of the description. If you are so inclined to help support out a friend, it does mean an awful lot to me if you do. I'd like to give a final thank you to my members and patrons, and if you'd like to sign up, get some cool perks and all that other good stuff, please check it out. It would mean a lot to me. But I'm going to wrap things up here, guys. Stay awesome, and I'll see you on Warren's channel. Good night.